You guys are good to start.
Sorry. Oh, yes, thank you. Brandon, I don't see the share my screen button. Is it already shared? Just want to make sure. I don't.
Maybe because let me look.
Oh, sorry, I don't see it down here.
I think it's because maybe you
got kicked off.
Kicked out.
Got logged out. Oh, I see it now.
Yes. Got it? Okay.
Yep. I see it. Let me share my screen. Okay. Oops. Go home. Okay. All right. Just sorry, 1 second here. I'm sorry. It's gonna, okay. Do this, share my screen. Okay. All right. Thank you all for your patience. Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's so great to have you join us this morning. I'm so happy to meet you all. My name is Kathy Jung, and I'm the Senior Manager of Survivor Services Department, where we work with individuals who experienced domestic violence and other serious crimes, human trafficking, and torture. So with me today are also three presenters who all work at NSC in our social services department as direct service staff and case managers. And all the presenters have direct service experience working with immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers who were victims of crime. And they have worked in this field from about 5 to 12 years. Their names are Brianna Youngs, Jocelyn Rico, and Sherihan Dida. So we really hope that this training will provide some tools and best practices when working with immigrant and refugee populations, and that throughout the various segments covered by our presenters, you'll walk away understanding more deeply what it takes for many of our clients to achieve a more meaningful and self-sufficient life here in the US. We hope to do this by sharing two different stories in a brief break followed by the story of Kara, and end with some takeaways and an example of a mindfulness exercise we like to do with our clients. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to start by sharing a very brief overview of our agency's mission, history, and services. So Nationality Service Center, our mission is to welcome and empower immigrants to thrive in our communities and pursue a just future. We were founded in 1921 to assist immigrant women to build language proficiency and gain citizenship. We just celebrated our 100-year anniversary, and we currently provide services to over 5,000 immigrants and refugees from over 100 countries annually. Sorry, it's a bit of a, oops. Oh, here we go, okay. So here are just some of our departments and areas that we focus on at our agency. So in the green circle, you'll see we provide services to survivor services. Refugee and community integration is an area that we also provide a range of services: immigration legal services, employment and advancement, health and wellness, interpretation and translation services as well. And on the left-hand side, you'll see these are just some of the more specific programs that we provide within each department. So we offer safety planning and case management, language access and proficiency support, outreach training and technical assistance, specialized health referrals and wellness spaces and activities, employment and career readiness trainings and clubs, educational workshops and ESL classes, youth programs, refugee placement and screenings, housing placement, and legal assistance and immigrants' rights protection as well. Okay, here we go. So here's some data on immigrants I'd like to briefly touch on. So recent data on immigrant populations in the most recent US Census, the percentage of immigrants in Philly was twice as high at 14%, as opposed to about 6 to 6.5% back in the 70s. Nearly 76,000 children under the age of 18, or about 1 in 4 city children, are immigrants and foreign-born. Nearly 1 in 5 Philadelphians in the labor force in 2016 was an immigrant, with the biggest number working in service jobs in the healthcare and education, hospitality, and retail sectors. The fastest growing group of foreign-born Philadelphians from 2000 to 2016 came from Africa, and the largest groups hailed from Asia and the Americas, the latter mostly from Latin America and the Caribbean. Europeans had their lowest share in recorded history. Just also wanted to briefly share with you this map. The regions where many of our clients are residing currently are in the Northeast as well as North Philly. And more recently, many have also been migrating and living in South Philly area. And I thought this was kind of interesting to see as well. So because I imagine many of you are not currently coming from Philadelphia County. So the blue shaded counties are just showing an increase in immigrants and just foreign-born populations. And the counties that are shaded in a tan color are showing a decrease. And this is data from, of course, 2010. Okay. So I'd like to also just give an overview of our Survivor Services Department. So we as a department, really aim to provide culturally responsive, multilingual, and trauma-informed programs. Our goal is to provide support, a path for healing, and to empower the communities we serve. Our Survivor Services programs provide services to immigrant survivors who have experienced or are currently experiencing domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, kidnapping, and other serious crimes, torture abroad, physical and or psychological, and human trafficking, sex and labor trafficking as well. So many of you saw the slide right before this, the one related to our agency, but I also wanted to just capture a bit more detail in terms of the more tailored services that we then provide within the Survivor Services Department. So we provide comprehensive and intensive case management services, immigration legal services, art, music, movement therapy, acupuncture, gentle yoga, massage, peaceful room, although many of these wellness activities had to switch to virtual platforms as a result of the pandemic, of course, housing advocacy, ESL, and group work as well. So the goal of our 3 programs is to really synergize and provide, again, comprehensive and holistic services and support. We really aim to work together with our clients to create a path towards healing and connect clients with communities that they would like to be a part of, and to resources that promote well-being, and collaborate with partners to build capacity to meet the unique needs of the populations that we also work with. Just wanted to briefly share with you just at a glance. So we work with clients from all 5 counties and beyond. 25% of our clients reported multiple victimizations. 98% of clients are 300% below the poverty guideline. Survivor Services provided services to over 656 survivors and their families this past year. And the services that were highest need were legal, case management, and financial assistance for housing and basic needs. Just wanted to show you here. So this is a chart of the types of victimization and their breakdown of what our clients have reported just this past year. And here's a breakdown of just some information about where our clients are coming from. We have clients coming from 56 different countries during this past quarter, and they spoke 27 different languages. So I wanted to also briefly share, once we receive a referral, the process of how an individual or family might be enrolled in our program. So what you see here is our services that we provide to each individual. And so eligibility screenings are conducted. We try our best to obtain affidavits in advance to minimize the need to rescreen or re-traumatize, and work with the referral agency to try to obtain as much information as we can to identify whether they fall under the categories of our programs. We also offer safety planning, intake and needs assessment, service plans every 90 days. We also conduct a refugee mental health screener at the start and also every 6 months. And an average enrollment of case management services typically ranges from anywhere from a year to a year and a half, though we have worked with some clients for longer, up to 3 years as well. And then we have the option to place cases on hold or freeze. And, it's just important to note that enrollment in our programs is completely voluntary and collaborative. And that's an important piece where if the individual or family doesn't feel that it would make sense for them to continue at this time, and they would just like to continue at another time, that's also an option that we offer as well. So I would like to then introduce our next speaker, Jocelyn Rico. She'll be sharing a little bit about immigrant survivors of domestic violence.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Kathy. As mentioned, I'm a case manager with the Bridge to Wellness program, which assists immigrant survivors of domestic violence and other violent crimes through trauma-informed case management and legal immigration services. So in an effort to identify domestic violence in immigrant communities, we will be looking at the red flags, as well as focusing in on a case study, the story of Sophie, and then highlighting Sophie's strengths and barriers as an immigrant survivor. So Kathy, if we can go ahead and identifying the DV. So domestic violence can be categorized as a pattern of coercive and assaultive behavior used by one partner to gain control and power over the other partner in a relationship. So some of those red flags that we do often see with immigrant survivors are composed of coercive and repetitive behaviors, right? So how does one partner gain control over the other one? Well, in these situations of domestic violence, we have seen that there are typically 5 red flags. So in order to gain control, those red flags can look like one partner controlling the other one. In instances like this, it usually starts off very slow. Can I see your phone? How's your family? Who do you have abroad? But we later see that it turns into a coercion of, I need to have all of your passwords. You cannot talk to your family abroad. You are here to be with me. Another red flag that we do see often is that defiance can be dangerous and lethal. So what this means is that it can lead to further abuse and manipulation as one partner is being completely isolated. And you can imagine if it's an immigrant survivor and the only person that they have in the United States is their partner, and then they're completely isolated from communicating with family abroad, defiance at this point doesn't seem like it can be accomplished. So then another flag that we do often see with cases of domestic violence include physical and sexual abuse, including restraining, pushing, hitting, strangulation, weapons, coercion, sex, rape, trafficking. So we have noticed that if a survivor was strangulated, the possibilities of lethality increase greatly. And then with immigrant survivors, what this means is that sometimes if they know that the partner or the abuser tends to ease on their abuse by coercion of sex, they often give in. And this can later turn into something against them in a court of law because the partner will claim that the sex was consensual when really the partner was just giving into coercion. We also often see emotional and psychological abuse. So as Kathy mentioned, we do offer access to mental health services. So what this looks like in a setting for immigrant survivors, it means that threats to the survivor and the family abroad, name-calling, jealousy, and possessiveness, stalking, isolation, and manipulation with children. So what we do see is that often the perpetrator will use children as bait, in terms of if you call the police or if you tell anyone, you'll never see your children again because you aren't legal in the United States. Or if you do something against me, your family abroad will have to pay for it. And then lastly, economic abuse. So what this entails includes stealing money from the survivor, hiding work authorization so that they cannot work, and or threatening the workplace with an ICE raid. So what this looks like is if the survivor is economically independent, this later turns into an act of survival for them. And in that case, if the perpetrator is withholding their accounts, withholding their legal documentation, it turns into economic abuse, as at this point, the survivor is dependent on the perpetrator. So now that we looked at how the coercive and repetitive behaviors exhibit themselves, I want to highlight Sophie's story. So we have a brief video and then we'll look at the red flags and what her journey looked like.
Later on, everything was very nice, and I didn't know. Later on, I could have a life like a nightmare. He just lied to me, and he just forced me to get money from my parents. He was very controlling. I couldn't use even internet. I couldn't write emails because he had to check everything. He told me he should know all passwords I have for my emails and who do I talk to. And I was scared because he always said he will kick us out of this country, me and my family. This police officer had told me, if you want to be alive, go to get the protection order. If you will go back to the house, one day you may lose your life.
Immigrant victims of domestic violence face serious danger from abusive partners that requires effective safety planning. A safety plan helps clients to remain safe while in the home, to file protective orders as necessary, and to be ready for an unplanned departure. In addition to preparing personal items, clients should be encouraged to gather and secure important identification documents and evidence of abuse.
I would advise to that woman, first thing, call police. If they are scared to call police, they should call to hotline. There are a lot of emergency numbers.
So I wanted to highlight Sophie's story because Sophie is a client that NSC worked directly with, but I also want to point out Sophie's red flags. So in this instance, we noticed that there was coercion and manipulation, wherein Sophie was forced to get money from her parents abroad. At this point, the perpetrator was controlling Sophie. There was complete isolation as he withheld all passwords and communication, and there was constant monitoring and emotional abuse out of not being able to communicate with anyone and being completely isolated. So then what happens is, if we can go down to getting help, Sophie's journey involved the police, right? But in this case, This is a very, very brief overview of what a survivor's journey looks like. So it can range from calling the police, safety planning, getting a protection from abuse order, accessing resources, and self-sufficiency. However, as an immigrant survivor, there's a lot of hesitancy when it comes to calling the police. And that is the case because if there are mixed status households or if there is an undocumented survivor, calling the police can lead to a threat of deportation and or a threat that their children might be taken away if there's any present. And then we have also seen that some of the barriers that include calling the police include language access, because if the survivor is unable to communicate with police should they come out, we have seen that usually they rely on the perpetrator, which then at this point gets to control the narrative. And then lastly, getting a protection from abuse order is something that is very lengthy. And if at this point the survivor hasn't documented the forms of abuse, it can be very difficult to make a case against the perpetrator if there isn't any evidence. So the graphic at the bottom right just is a basic overview regarding what a client's journey looks like. So ranging from actually calling 911 or gaining services through an agency like ourselves, a PFA, which involves multiple courts, which then at this point, there has to be childcare, there has to be language access, there has to be money for transportation. Then we have family court and pending custody cases, then access to therapy, access to language, as well as living arrangements, because if we remember at the beginning, if the perpetrator is withholding all money, the survivor then is left with nothing. And then, of course, immigration. So there are legal avenues for survivors. However, these are also very lengthy, costly, and at times put the survivor in danger, as at this point you're making yourself known to immigration services that you are here as an immigrant survivor and may expose yourself to greater risk. So then lastly, I do want to touch on Sophie's strengths and barriers. So the strengths can look like social supports, resiliency, the willingness to communicate to begin with, organizational supports, and individual advocacy. But with the barriers, there's multiple. Language, distrust of police and authority figures, wherein they distrust police from their country of origin, and so they believe that police here can't help. So when should clients call the police? Well, it depends, because in Philadelphia, we are considered a sanctuary city. So at this point, survivors at least know that police officers are not supposed to cooperate with ICE or Immigration and Customs Enforcement. However, if the individual is afraid, the likelihood of them calling the police is very minimal. And at that point, if you're trying to make a legal case as an immigrant survivor, it's very difficult to do so if you don't have police reports to back it up. However, it isn't impossible, and there are hotlines and there are agencies like ourselves that assist clients throughout this process. And then secondly, we also do want to consider how we screen clients and how we assess their needs. So in order to provide services to immigrant survivors, we have to keep in mind of what questions to ask. So those questions can look like something regarding language access. For example, do you need an interpreter? Has anyone threatened you or your family abroad? Do you have family or friends in the area? Do you know who to call in an emergency? But with all of that, we also have to consider the barriers to safety, right? So the fear of deportation being one of the greatest ones, as well as language barriers, cultural and religious beliefs, lack of family support in the U.S., fear of losing children and separation, and threat to family abroad. So what that looks like is sometimes survivors don't know that domestic violence is a crime in the United States, right? Because they come from cultures that may be where the man dominates. It doesn't look like domestic violence there. It looks like, well, I'm married and what happens at home stays at home. It can also look like threats to family abroad, wherein we have to go into safety planning to keep the family abroad safe. And so what that looks like is calling the embassies, calling the consulates, working with NGOs in order to ensure that the family abroad stays safe while the survivor is getting help in the United States. All of that then leads to access to services as well as a journey that hopefully leads towards self-sufficiency. As in Sophie's case, I do just want to point out she is a permanent resident now, and she is currently working at a law firm and working towards her legal degree as an attorney. So I just want to pass this off to Sharahan. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jocelyn, so much. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick introduction video. We can play it now.
Human trafficking is slavery.
And it happens all over America.
Any child, any woman, any man could potentially become a victim of human trafficking.
I am a victim of labor trafficking.
I was victim of child sex trafficking, but now I own my body.
Human trafficking is any kind of forced labor.
It can happen to anybody.
I am a mother.
I am an author.
I am a son.
I'm an advocate.
I am an educator.
I'm a sister.
I am a brother.
I'm so much more than what happened to me.
I am strong.
I am brave.
I am outspoken.
I am compassionate.
I am a survivor.
I'm a survivor.
I am a survivor.
I am a survivor.
I am a survivor.
I am a survivor of human trafficking.
Great, thank you so much. So I just wanted to share that video for a quick highlight and overview of anti-human trafficking. As Kathy mentioned, a program at NSC, Nurse Survival Services. So what is, actually we're going to skip the Pennsylvania spotlight and just go straight to what is trafficking. So quickly just wanted to separate the two terms. There's human smuggling, which is the illegal crossing of an international border, usually voluntary. And there is human trafficking, the use of force, fraud, coercion to exploit someone for sex or labor, not voluntary, does not require movement. So I just wanted to quickly highlight those two terms. I know they can be confusing, and go through the means of control really quickly as well. So anti-human trafficking looks like this: economic abuse, using privilege, physical abuse, sex abuse, denying, blaming, minimizing, isolation, emotional intimidation, coercion, threats, as it's similar to actually DV in some cases, but this is definitely used predominantly for labor trafficking victims and sex trafficking victims. And then we can move on to the next picture. So I want to also point out the the bottom left picture, the oh sorry, not the red flags. Thank you. So these are our the population that we work with at NSC, and as you can see here, 40% is women and 60% are male. Ages 17 to 75 is the highest. Average is 39 years old. Countries of origin: Honduras, Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, the DR, Liberia, Nigeria, Kenya, China, India. So those are the top countries that we serve. Immigration status: T visa holders or unauthorized. And most frequent services that we support our clients is the housing support, immigration status application, and mental health care. So the common industries that survive anti-human human traffic survivors go through are domestic work, restaurants, agriculture, construction, landscaping, hospitality, traveling sales crew, health and beauty, and baby. Okay. And then I'm going to talk a little bit, let's jump to red flags. So how do you know that your client or patient is being trafficked or is among these trafficked victims? Here's a couple screening questions that are helpful. Most are not free to leave or come and go. They are unpaid, paid very little is a huge red flag. Paid only through tips is also a huge red flag. Works long and unusual hours, owes a large debt and is unable to pay it off, was recruited through false promises, lives and works in high security locations, shows signs of physical and or sexual abuse, not in control of personal possessions, and appears fearful, anxious, or depressed, especially with mention of law enforcement, as Jocelyn highlighted earlier, the threats of deportation, unfamiliarity with systems in the U.S., all of these things are very important when we are talking about trafficked victims. Okay. And the vulnerabilities that our clients experience. So if we can click on the first picture. So in this demographic specifically, families that come to the US, they have lack of family and lack of support systems, right? So no friends, no networking, no communities. That's a huge vulnerability that our client is experiencing. And then the next picture. Sorry, I'm kind of going through this a little bit more quicker. The socioeconomic status and proper documentations. So our clients are susceptible to working lower paid jobs, as you may know. They do have the fear of deportations, as mentioned, leaving or seeking help. So again, this idea of not being familiar with the systems and just kind of avoiding or keeping their head down, not asking too many questions. That's another vulnerability. Linguistic and cultural differences. So this is huge. Language barriers, unaware of resources, and cultural norms. These are all barriers to seeking help. Language barrier is a huge one. Not really putting, not knowing how to really communicate to providers regarding the issues that they are experiencing. It's really a huge barrier. Okay. Mistrust of authorities. As mentioned earlier, it's fear of deportation, discrimination, belief in undocumented individuals do not have rights. So many of our clients, when they do seek out support and they are undocumented, even with case managers or with their physicians and with other providers, they do have a fear of even talking about their status or the things they need because of the mistrust of authorities or the power dynamics, which I will mention later on in the presentation, but I just wanted to highlight here in this slide. Okay, and I really want to give the attention to the story of Muhammad and travel through his journey through his story. So we are actually just going to play like 45 seconds of Muhammad's story, just so you can hear his hear what he has to say. So 6 days.
So, and then the support system, number 5, the support system, it was very helpful. As I indicated earlier, if there was no support from NSC or I or my friends or community, I couldn't have survived. So it's those three key factors or key players who managed to support me and help me to be where I am today. So it was really, really, I mean, great. I'm so grateful for what they did, and it was really helpful. So, and then in question 5, what are some ways that providers can make immigrants feel safe and welcome? I think, as I indicated, we were in unprecedented years. Last year and this year still we're not back to the normal. So However, if there will be a community outreaching, some gatherings, sharing stories, meeting communities maybe from time to time. I think that what makes everybody feel very happy and feel welcome, and then just to have a people around you, talk to everyone that you meet, and then share some factors or some commonalities with each other. So and then have that sense of community, and also that will make someone feel like, hey, this is my second home. I don't feel like I miss a lot of people. You'll be missing people home a little bit, but the moment they're here, also there is a kind of social engagement and social interaction between each other. I think it makes someone feel this is a second home, absolutely. And
Okay.
then
Right there. Thank you so much. So I wish I can play the whole thing for you, but because of time, unfortunately, I cannot. But Muhammad's story is really powerful. I just want to briefly touch on a couple things that he said throughout the video or the recording. So Muhammad is an asylum seeker. That's different from a trafficked victim or a refugee. And we will go through that, I think, towards those definitions later on in the presentation. But just a quick overview, Muhammad, he is from Sudan. He has an academic background. Him and his family spent 18 years in Darfur camp, which is located a little bit outside of Sudan. So there's a picture of the camp. So 18 years he spent there. And he had the opportunity to study in South Africa. So he was actually able to go to University of Cape Town and pursue his PhD in development studies, and experienced a lot of backlash. So he was looking over his shoulder everywhere he went, having this background, also being a Muslim. So he experienced xenophobia, racial injustices, and for his political opinions, he also received a lot of torture because of these things and his identities. So he sought asylum in the US, and I had the pleasure of working with him for about a year now. But I wanted to highlight his story and just talk about that Muhammad did experience quite a bit of barriers, so we can go through the barriers. Even as an educated individual, he knows like 3 languages, English being one of them, fluent in English. He did experience quite a bit of barriers coming to the US. So healthcare, as an asylum seeker, you pretty much don't have access to any welfare or public assistance. You do have to wait 5 years, unfortunately. So once he did get his work permit, we were able to have all these things taken care of: groceries, applying to higher education, getting him connected to legal services, assisting with bills and rent coverage. So all the necessities we were able to assist Muhammad with, but it was quite a bit of an experience for him, culture shock and traumatic experience. Okay. I also want to highlight Muhammad's strengths working with him. He is multilingual, as I mentioned, does have a PhD and was a former professor in Sudan. He has strong social supports, and that's something I really want to really stress today. Community supports is something that Muhammad shared during his recording, that he wouldn't have survived without agency supports, without having friends, his cousin here in the US. Many of our clients do not have these resources that Muhammad had. So they come with nothing, and either by themselves or with their family, they come to the US and start from scratch pretty much, and do not have those same social supports and language and culture. And it's really difficult to have more support around mental health and around just having someone there to guide you and help you around systems is really difficult. But Mohammed was able to get those assistance, and the way our agency empowered Mohammed. So we can go through that. Mohammed is he's African and identifies as Black. So he did receive a lot of emotional support at NSC, but also Black therapists in Philadelphia in general. This idea that it's very, very crucial to have services staff reflect our clients. So it's very important for him to have someone that looks like him and speaks like him to give services. As for many of our clients, he had a connection to community resources in Philly, assisting applying to colleges. So right now, Mohammed is going to Temple University here in Philadelphia and really wants to advance his career and become a teacher in Philly. So he's really doing great for himself. But so thank you so much. And I think we're gonna take a 5-minute break, I believe. Okay, so I guess we're gonna return at 9:35 or.
Yes.
Okay.
If everyone could return back at 9:35, we're going to, once we come back, we're also going to be doing a brief poll with everyone. So, thank you for joining us thus far, and I hope you return, and we'll see you soon. right.
All right, hi everybody, welcome back. We will be doing our 2 polling questions now. Brandon, do you happen to have those polling questions?
Yep, they're coming right now.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So if everybody wouldn't mind just taking a minute and going into the polling section and just voting real quick, that would be great. Give like a minute or 2 for that, and then we can move into the next section. Okay, great. Kathy, we can move on to the next section for PPR. Just one moment. I think we're having some technical difficulties, so please just bear with us for 1 minute while we get this sorted out. Okay. Kathy, can you? Okay, great. So yeah, we're going to move into immigrant survivors of torture section now. And as Kathy mentioned earlier, my name is Brianna, and I am a case manager on the Philadelphia Partnership for Resilience team, and we work with survivors of torture. So before moving into this section, I just want to give kind of like a disclaimer or trigger warning that I will be talking about torture a little bit. So if at any point you need to just kind of mute or leave, feel free to. I just wanted to give a heads up for that. And I'm not sure if the screen is frozen for everybody else, but I think it's, oh, okay, you guys can't hear me. Again, just bear with us as we work through these technical difficulties. Okay, so the Philadelphia Partnership for Resilience team, like I said, we work with survivors of torture and their families in the greater Philadelphia region to rebuild their lives and to heal from the physical and psychological wounds from torture. So now we can kind of move into defining torture. So there's no typical torture survivor and no single torture symptom. So torture wounds body, mind, and soul. Therefore, psychological reactions are normal reactions to this kind of extreme stress. And torture is an assault on both the individual survivor and the community. And there's also a need to understand torture experience within the context of being a refugee. It's an added layer to the complexity of the trauma. Some different types of torture include kidnapping, beating, threats and psychological torture, sensory deprivation, witnessing others being tortured, forced postures, sexual torture, severe humiliation, and sensory stress. And on the screen here, we have the definition of torture broken down into eligibility guidelines. So the individual needs to be targeted, has to occur abroad, under the custody or control of the offender. There has to be a severe infliction of physical or psychological pain or suffering, and it has to occur under the color of law. So next, we're going to be taking a look at a case study. So we'll be looking at Kara. And in order to get to know Kara, we're going to do an interactive experience. So for this exercise, if you don't mind closing your eyes or softening your gaze, whatever you're more comfortable with, I'm going to read a series of statements that are true for Kara. And I just want you to put yourself in her shoes and feel the statements that I'm making as if you are Kara. So you can go ahead and close or soften your gaze. Your name is Kara. You are 32 years old. You have 3 children, a 3-year-old boy, a 6-year-old girl, and a 10-year-old girl. All of your children and your husband are in the States with you, but things have been tense with your husband since you got here, and you're trying to make ends meet while adjusting. You arrived 6 months ago to the U.S. in Philadelphia. You're still warming up to your small apartment in Northeast Philly. You and your husband were political activists in your home country. You wanted to make change and were involved with going to peaceful marches with signs asking for changes from your government. You were at a march when you were kidnapped by a rebel group that works for the government. They beat you for being at the march. After 3 weeks, you escaped, and that's when you and your husband decided to flee with your children. Now you are in the U.S. trying to learn English and navigate all the systems here. You don't have health insurance for you or your family, and you're not sure how to get it. You want to take English classes, but aren't sure where to find them. You and your husband just got your work permits, and your husband got a job last week, and he works long hours. You want to get a job as well, but are waiting until school starts for your 2 older children and need to find a daycare for your youngest. You are worried about who will hire you since you can't speak English like your husband. You think to yourself, if I could just get my driver's license, then I could deliver food. You had a medical emergency a couple of months ago, and the medical bills just keep coming in. You have 6 so far, totaling in more than $10,000. You have no idea where to even begin with that. You think to yourself, I have overcome so much, yet there is still so much more to overcome. You remind yourself of your resiliency when you fled the prison where you were tortured, when you fled your home country, saying goodbye, wondering if you would ever get to go back. You remind yourself of the sleepless nights when you first arrived to the U.S. How will we pay rent? How will I know where to get groceries? Will I have the things I need to cook our meals? Will we have beds for our kids? How will we get them their school uniforms? And you remember how these things fell into place. You remind yourself that you can do this, that you are strong and resilient. As you're thinking of these things, one of your kids calls you needing help with a snack. You can go ahead and open your eyes. Thank you so much for participating in that. So then moving into the story of Kara, it's important to think about some of the emotions she might be having when coming in for services. So she could be feeling anxious, stressed, feelings of depression, feelings of detachment. She could have hope for the future, hope for her kids, guilt about leaving. She could be feeling overwhelmed. So these are some of the things that she might be feeling when she comes to get services. And it's important to be mindful of this so we can be mindful of how to provide best practices and considerations. So when she comes in, we'll do a screening where we go over questions similar to the eligibility guidelines, then our intake process, which is where we go over extensive documents to gather necessary information in order to best service her. And then we'll do an in-depth look at her goals and service plan. And on her service plan, she has 5 goals. So getting her driver's license, getting connected to a lawyer, enrolling in ESL classes, assistance with enrolling her kids in school, and assistance with medical bills. So Kara will be experiencing potentially a lot of barriers when we're doing case management, and our goal is to assist her in navigating the systems and learning how to overcome the barriers and achieve her goals, all while working towards self-sufficiency. So the services are going to be client-centered, client-focused, and client-driven. Another important consideration to make is that Kara is carrying a lot of trauma, and that will affect how she perceives the world and interacts with it. Therefore, as a service provider, I'll need to be mindful of that. And I just want to take one in-depth look at one of her goals and kind of the challenges there. So getting her driver's license. Some of the challenges might be her English level, getting all the documents needed, depending on immigration status. It can vary. Finding time to go to the DMV and finding someone to watch her kids when she goes. So just to give an example of barriers. But now we can move on to the next slide. So we're going to take an in-depth look at what emotional support and case management looks like. So for an emotional support, it's very important to have a trauma-informed lens. So trauma is what can happen when a person or group of people experience or witness an event, either directly or indirectly, that is physically and or emotionally threatening and or harmful, causing long-term destructive effects on one's well-being. Oh, sorry, Kathy, we can move to the next slide. Perfect. And trauma-informed means understanding trauma from victimization, immigration, experience, family separation, and others. So these are the main things I like to keep in mind. Creating safety for the client, so creating areas that are calm and comfortable, giving the client choice, so providing Kara with options with her treatment, empowering her, so noticing capabilities and involving her in the process, collaborating with Kara. We'll be making decisions together, and she'll be letting me know what she wants to work on, and I'll come alongside her and assist her. And then creating a sense of trustworthiness between us, where we're providing clear and consistent information to her to build that rapport. Then the next thing that can be helpful is referring Kara to a therapist if she would like. Oh, sorry, this is, I'll go to active listening next, but first I just want to touch on therapy. Sorry, Kathy, I think this slide isn't in there. Sorry. So referring a client to therapy can be a great space for Kara, and it can be a space for her to go more in depth and get additional support. This could also be difficult for her, though, due to different cultural barriers. So it's crucial to include Kara in this process of finding a therapist and looking for one that either has a similar cultural background or is familiar with hers. So then moving into active listening. With Kara, I will definitely be using a lot of active listening skills. I'll be restating, summarizing. I want to encourage her to continue talking by using verbal and nonverbal encouragers. I'll reflect back on what she's saying. When I give feedback, I'll be intentional to use I statements and not you statements. Encourage Kara to name and describe her feelings and her situations that she wants to talk about. I'll continue to validate her and pause and give space for her to share and redirect when needed. And an important consideration to make, active listening could be challenging when using an interpreter. So it's important to think of creative ways to do this. So doing in-person meetings if possible, video calls on Zoom. You'll need less verbal encouragers because you won't be able to have as many nonverbal ones if you're not in person. Then moving into the strengths-based approach. So the strengths-based approach is an approach that focuses on individuals' strengths, including personal strengths and social and community networks, and not on their deficits. This is holistic and multidisciplinary, and it's where you work with the individual to promote their well-being. It is outcome-led and not service-led. So when I'm working with Kara, I'm going to be, drawing on her strengths. What are they? I'll be thinking of that in conversation, being intentional to point her strengths out to her and encourage her to lean into those when trying new things. Then next we have motivational interviewing. And this is a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication with particular attention to the language of change. It's designed to strengthen motivation for and commitment to a specific goal by eliciting and exploring the person's own reasons for change in an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. So the goal of this is to create and amplify discrepancy between present behavior and broader goals. So a helpful acronym can be RULE. So you want to resist. I'm going to want to resist telling Kara what she has to do. I want her to realize what she wants to do. And I'm, like I said before, coming alongside her and helping her in that. I'm going to want to understand her motivation. That way, when things get tough and there's a lot of barriers, we can draw back on that motivation. I want to listen to her with empathy and create a safe atmosphere. And I want to empower her as well. So those are some helpful emotional supports. And now we're going to move more into the case management part of it. So goal setting is a great tool. Like I keep saying, I'm going to let Kara lead when we're setting her goals, and I'm going to be there to assist her. So the helpful things can be creating a timeline, deciding who will do what to achieve the goal, breaking down the goal into smaller pieces if we need to, being realistic with Kara about timelines and systems to give her realistic expectations. And it's also important to know if there's a goal, if she has a goal for a service I can't provide, referring her to other services that can assist her in following up with those referrals. So then moving on to assisting with communication with systems, I want to understand the systems that Kara is in. So if she's renting a place, who's her landlord? What's her relationship like with them? What school are her children getting enrolled into? Who's a good point person that I can communicate with there? Does she have a lawyer? Does she talk to her lawyer often? Does she know how to contact them? Does she have a community in her neighborhood or a place of worship? Does she have other case managers that she's working with? So these are the systems that she's working in, or she's potentially working in, that I'm going to want to understand and be able to work alongside. And doing this in a way that creates self-sufficiency so that Kara will be able to communicate with these systems on her own once her case is closed. And then we can move on to the next one, so weekly check-ins. This is just a great space to be intentional with taking time to see how Kara is doing, both emotionally and with the goals. And then this way, Kara knows that she has a designated time each week to discuss concerns and updates. So let's say she gets a lot of documents in the mail and she wants to talk to me about them and she's feeling kind of panicked. She knows that on this day and time, she has my undivided attention to bring those to me and we can discuss them. So yeah, these are some great case management tools that I would be using with her. And then our services would last about a year and a half, and then her case would close. So yeah, and that is everything. And the person going next, I believe, is Kathy.
Thanks, Bree. So just to be mindful of time, I just want to very briefly delve into how and when Sophie, Mohammed, and Kara cross paths and the similarities they may share. Already throughout our presentation, you saw and heard of the different barriers and strengths, so I'll try to move through these quickly. So systems, so there are a lot of systems, and I'm sure I'm missing some others here on this slide, and navigating these many systems that our clients are trying to access can be very difficult and overwhelming. As a native English speaker, I often find myself feeling really overwhelmed at times. And then to imagine, someone who has no English, possibly even pre-literate in their own language, not as much knowledge of how systems work. And of course, the fear of unknown and repercussions they may face can be huge barriers to obtain one or all of these needs. And sometimes you can't access other services without accessing certain, documentation that you really need to be able to get the services and the help. So I just wanted to kind of briefly show that. And then the barriers that Mohammed, Sophie, and Kara might be facing and experiencing here. And I just wanted to also, just again, emphasize the fear of deportation and really the fear of family and safety abroad. And so I think sometimes, not just for the fear that they're experiencing for themselves and their family here, but we work with clients who have, young children that are with their neighbor living abroad. And so just the fear of something possibly happening to them is terrifying. And so a huge barrier. And certainly around cultural expectations and stigma, accessing mental health services is also huge as well. I just really wanted to quickly move through and mention how the pandemic has really exacerbated the existing challenges for many of our clients and created new ones, and then how we as a program tried to respond to assist. And so 98% were living at or below the federal poverty guideline. Of course, 70% of our clients lacked emergency funds, employer benefits, health insurance, and the right to claim unemployment compensation. Many of our clients worked in or work in retail, warehouses, restaurants, and 67% were essential workers. Most of our clients also live in crowded multi-generational housing where spread, was more likely. 35% have chronic health issues, and most don't have the option of working from home. So about 54% reported lost income. 512% more clients sought food assistance from NSC, and majority are at risk of eviction, and many need interpretation and are not aware of their rights. And of course, as many of you, I'm sure, are very well aware of the limited capacity at shelters with increased violence. And we try to then respond as an agency by providing culturally appropriate food deliveries, work towards eviction mitigation. Some of our clients were not eligible for a lot of the different programs that the city phased out. And so those are some things that we were working on. Back to work programs. We also provided healthcare support and vaccine clinics, mental health support, technological support around accessing ESL classes when they might not have a laptop or internet, and certainly school advocacy as those transitions happened as well. So just wanted to kind of briefly then move to strengths. So we have here just some strengths that our clients have shared with us, as well as some that we've often observed in the individuals and families and communities that we work with. So lived through experiences, education status, community, network, sense of community, tolerant to stress, faith, view stressors as opportunities, and I'm sure you've have heard about post-traumatic growth as well, high in self-efficacy, leadership, a sense of purpose, forgiveness, being able to forgive or go through and face that, the process of grief and loss, and working towards healing and forgiveness as well, and sense of closure and moving forward. Sorry. Okay. So at this time, we'd like to then share with you some takeaways. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm speaking kind of over here because I can't access the screen. But Brandon, would there be any way for you to make Jocelyn the host at this time?
Yes, I'll do that right now.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Jocelyn should be the presenter now.
So now we're focusing in on the takeaways.
Okay, thank you so much, Jocelyn. Sorry, I'll just wait. I see that we have a couple pop-ups. Okay, great. Okay, best practices and considerations. So we're going to talk about application. How does this information apply to you? So I just want to quickly, I know that we talked about safety planning already, but these are kind of the core concepts of safety planning: is to understand, to learn, to listen, develop, be conscious, know that immigrants' remedy available to immigrant survivors may be lengthy, being aware. So this is just kind of an overview here. I won't go into all the details, and hopefully we can share the slides with you after this presentation so you have this information as well. And what is our response? So first we're going to just look at all of the topics here that are very crucial when working with immigrants, survivor victims, immigrants in general. So I'm going to quickly go through all of these topics here. The first one is informed referrals. Language access. Does your agency or place of work have access to languages that your clients, customers, or patients speak, such as Language Line Solutions is a popular one with many services. Considering culturally and linguistically appropriate services when possible. Also, some questions to consider. Do other organizations that you're referring to require social security numbers or ID to enroll the clients? So many of immigrants do not have social security or ID, depending on when they first arrive and how long they process their work permits. Usually they do not obtain an ID or social security right away, and it takes some time. When you refer a client and they do not have these things, I think it's very important to make sure that before you refer them, that if they require these things. And do they need to bring anything with them for their intake? So being mindful of the intake process and how lengthy that will be, and if they need any other documentation that is necessary for them to be enrolled in case management services or resources in Philadelphia. Be mindful of the ways in which you make a referral. Do you know the names of the people at the agencies to which you're referring to? So these are partner organizations. If you are working with a partner organization in Philadelphia or surrounding counties, just to be aware of who the person you're referring to, if there's a name or a face that you directly interact with. That's really the easiest way when making referrals and to make the process go faster. Do you know if the person to whom you're referring speaks the language of the client? So this is also another important topic with language access. The referral agencies that you're referring to, do they have the language or a staff member that speaks the same language? Spanish, Arabic, French is kind of the top three. That's something to consider. Considering the importance of the community for survivors when you are discussing supports. So we talked about a little bit community supports. If there is some way that you can connect your clients to community resources within their ethnic or language population, that would also be fantastic support for them. And then we can go on to the next slide, please. Interpretation. We did touch a little bit on the interpretation, but I'm going to quickly just point out some of the important points here when working with interpreters. So familiarity with your agency's language access, policies, training on how to use Language Line. Many of staff do not know how to use language access or platform. I think having those trainings in your agencies will be vital when working with immigrants, particularly introducing interpreter and discuss confidentiality. Sometimes as providers, we just assume that the interpreter will keep confidence, but I think really making sure the client and the patient that is on the phone and the the patient that is on the phone and the interpreter know that this conversation is confidential, and we have to stress that with with this population in particular, because they go through high rates of trauma and high rates of culture shock, and not being familiar with the systems in the U.S. I think it's very important to say that this conversation is confidential. Your documents are confidential, and we are providing this safe space for you, even if it's via telephone. Speak in short sentences when working with an interpreter and not jumbled sentences. Speak directly to the clients. Try to avoid high automatic speech and complicated sentences as much as possible. Be mindful of whom you are using as the interpreter. If this person is not interpreting very well, I very much stress to find a different interpreter. And also not to use family members, friends, or children to interpret for the client. As much as we would like to do that, perhaps the perpetrator is in the family, or the friend is the perpetrator, and they are manipulating the client. So it's very important to find your own interpreter when not using the family members or friends, even though that's easy access. I just want to stress that point. Okay, culture. All right. So I'm going to just highlight when working with a diverse clientele, such as immigrants, it's very important to have multicultural competence. I know you probably heard this before in your agencies or your place of work, but multicultural competence, really, it's research. If you do not know the client's background, the client's language, the history of the country, origin that they're from, I suggest to really take the time to read peer-reviewed articles and research where the client is from, where your patient is from. You will have a better understanding, a better idea culturally, and be more competent when working with them. Assess linguistic levels, if they're beginner English, intermediate. Do not assume that the client does not speak any English at all, or just has, or on the opposite end, knows how to speak English, even though they probably it's broken English, as we would say. Never assume the linguistic level. Make sure you assess that. Consulting with colleagues if you do not know the answer regarding their culture. If colleagues are from that same culture, I think having cultural humility and being able to talk with colleagues from the same culture, or understand where your client's from, is really important. Strengths in community, I think this is very important as well. Being able to not just see that our clients in the immigrant population is they do have strengths, as we highlighted in all three of these stories, and as Kathy has pointed out earlier through their paths crossing, that our clients do come with skills and education and a background that is very resilient when coming to the U.S. or coming to a new country. So our clients are quite resilient. So how can we as providers tap into that resiliency and work within their strengths? And so a strengths-based approach is the best approach when working with immigrants. And I'm just going to go through all these. So avoid preconceived notions of one's culture, responsibility for knowledge. That means do not lean on the client to tell you information about their culture. You can ask them and be curious, but I think your level of research is important when working with our clients. And we can move on to race. Becoming allies. So we don't have time for this video, but I do want to highlight, in the very beginning, we shared a bunch of statistics with you, and I hope that you were able to take some notes. So most of our clients live 300% below poverty line. That means most of our clients are experiencing high levels of poverty, and we see that in many big cities, including Philadelphia. So the unemployment rate did sharply increase for our clients during the pandemic, as many of you have experienced when working with your clients or your patients, that it really hit this population quite hard. And poverty is another level of racial inequalities, as we may have heard in, over the news or in articles or just in social media with Black Lives Matter, that these issues are more brought to the surface, which is great, but most of our clients are still experiencing these things and experiencing on a daily basis. And how can we as providers be able to say that we are your ally and we are here for you? Again, it comes down to your partner organizations, partnering with, for example, the BIPOC project, Black, Indigenous, and people of color movements, being able to partner with organizations and movements that are solely focused on racial inequality, and finding ways that we can empower our clients and work on a strengths-based approach, and being able to minimize racial biases. Okay, we can move on to the next one. Power dynamics. So as you may know, as providers, you are operating out of authority. So when working with the clients, many of the immigrant populations, they are very come from polite cultures. So that means they save face and they're very polite, and sometimes they don't speak up. And it's really important as a provider, knowing that you are working with someone who comes from this particular culture, that are receiving services, may feel this power dynamic as this natural power dynamic that they are experiencing, and feel belittled. So what can we do at this, having this position of power, being able to just be authentic and transparent with the client? I think showing that you are human is really important. I think being able to say, I do not have all the answers. I'm sorry, I don't have this answer right now. Let me research it. Let me talk with colleagues. Let me figure it out, and I'll come back. And coming from, again, I want to stress this, a strengths-based approach, highlighting the client's skills, highlighting the client's resiliency, being able to say to the client and vocalizing that they these are their goals, these are the highlights of their strengths. And collaborating with a survivor means developing his or her treatment plan, but I want to also say that it is not you developing the treatment plan, it is they who are developing their treatment plan. And again, we want to facilitate this equal work. So being able to say that I'm this is a working relationship, and we are going to work towards accomplishing your goals. And these are your strengths, and these are the things that I see you doing. And the final result is independence, that you don't need my assistance anymore. Once you are know the systems, know everything, and you're independent, that's perfect. Your case is closed. That's what we're really want. If you don't need me anymore, that's perfect. My goal is for you, is for a successful termination where the client feels independent and do not need services. Okay, I think we are moving on. So it is 10:15. but I think the mindfulness exercise is quite important. So I think, Bree, do you want to take over this one?
Sure, thanks. And I'll be going over this really quickly. So just wanted to give 2 quick mindfulness activities that you can do on your own, or you can do with a client over the phone, with an interpreter, in person. So we have square breathing and counting fingertips. So square breathing, I have the picture on the slide. You just inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, rest for 4. So when doing this with a client, you can say we're going to inhale for 4, 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, exhale 2, 3, 4, and do it with them. And I found if I walk the interpreter through it beforehand, it makes it easier to do it with an interpreter and the client. And then counting fingertips in this other picture, you just put your fingertips together like that and number them. So normally I have my thumb as 1, pointer finger 2, and then 3, 4, and my pinky is 5. And then I have the client put their hands together as well, and I just count off numbers and have them touch those 2 fingers together. So if I said 1, they would touch their thumbs together. 5, they would touch their pinkies together. And that's also very easy to do over the phone with an interpreter. And then clients can do these on their own in their own time as well. And then next, I think Jocelyn is doing Q&A and resources.
Yes, thank you so much, Bree. So here are just a couple of resources that we compiled for you to access. I believe you are also getting access to a flyer as well as some other information, but at this time, and I do know we're running a bit behind, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask those.
So to be respectful of time, I guess, we also, I just in the chat listed our email addresses as well. So if you have any questions that you'd like for us to answer in more detail, Jocelyn, Bree, Sherry-Han, or myself would be happy to answer them as well. And we also have some resources that we'll share our camera now. We have some resources as well that we compiled for this presentation, which can be accessed via Lobby, and we can also separately email those as well. So thank you so much for joining us in this very early morning, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join in and speak with us about how to continue to support immigrant survivors. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for your presentation. It was excellent.
Thank you all. Have a great day. Brandon, is there any way that we can access the polls by any chance after we close this presentation?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
I have it already. So
oh, you do? Okay, thank you,
yeah,
Tim.
do you want me to send it to you?
Yes, please.
Is this Kathy?
Yes.
Okay, I'll email it to you, okay?
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you both for your help.
Sure.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.